Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Painted in Color podcast. I'm co-host Lauren Brown, joined by co-host Mia Araujo and Eric Wilkerson. And today we are going to talk about feedback, not just giving feedback, but also receiving feedback, the kinds of feedback you run into on the internet when it's unsolicited, or feedback from your friends and people who you trust, or feedback to yourself even. Because being self-critical is also a big part of being an artist, unfortunately and fortunately. So let's get into it, shall we? Hello, y'all. How are we doing?
All right.
Not bad. Yeah. Well, there's also feedback that you might get from, a potential client or your employer.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways that you can accept what is being told to you.
Yeah,
You know?
it exists in all different forms.
Yeah. And it's one thing to have somebody typing something online that you read and you don't hear the context or the what is the word, not the context, but what is the word,
The tone?
the tone. You don't
Yeah.
get the tone through just words, so you got to pepper it with emojis and hearts and love and all that stuff, because otherwise it's like your anatomy is off, this is wrong. It's like, and then all of a sudden you feel like you're being attacked.
Yeah.
It's like, who the hell is this? I didn't even ask this person.
It's like I didn't even want this feedback.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think any level of emojis would save unsolicited feedback, but that's just my opinion.
That's 100% true. It really is. And of course, that's going to be the one that sticks with you the longest, because you could get 100 really sweet comments about how wonderful you did and how much a piece of art moved that person. And then there's one person who's like, I think this is a ripoff of something else that exists in the world. And like that's the one that sticks with you. And it's just like, why? It's like those negative things always like stay in the brain. So they're just like, it makes it that much harder to be an artist online, because that's a thing that you have to contend with regularly, because people just are able to do anything. Anybody can type anything on the internet. So they're entitled to give feedback as well, even if you didn't ask for it.
Yeah. I saw this one guy I know, he posted a magic card illustration recently, and somebody didn't miss a beat, just got on there and said, "This reminds me of Donato's work." And I was like, oh god damn.
Yeah.
Like, let him exist. Like,
Yeah.
let this guy live. Without
How
going,
could you?
this reminds me of. Oh man.
Unpack that a little for the non-artists out there that think
Yeah.
that's a compliment,
Right.
Because there
Yeah.
are some people that think they're actually like, I'm comparing you to a genius. Aren't you flattered?
Right. Right. And for a number of people out there, they have the people that they admire, but they don't want to constantly hear that.
Mm-hmm.
10, 15, 20 years into their career, this reminds me of NC Wyeth, or this reminds me of. I'm like, well, yeah, but thank you. So I don't know. It's however you take it, but I mean, if it doesn't have the emojis added to it, you just imagine whatever's going on in your head, however you might take it. But oh well.
Yeah. I mean, there is a lot of that kind of thing going around too, where a lot of non-artists will not understand the things that tend to, like, for lack of a better word, trigger us and make us feel like, oh, like not this again. We see this so many times. Like even the silly stuff, like, oh, like I can't draw, like I can't even draw a stick figure, or I can't even draw, like the silly little things like that, which is really just funny. But people don't understand how often these things get repeated across the internet and amongst non-artists to artists, and definitely getting compared to another artist is one of them, because you really have worked so hard to form your own identity, and the art that you create, even when there are influences from other people, are still inspired by all of your life experiences and what you find important in the world and how you funnel all of that into your own product. So it can be very personal. Sometimes it's not personal, and that's fine too. But when your art really like means a lot to you and you like worked really hard to make it your identity, it can be really disheartening to get compared to somebody else, because you're like, oh, like, all this work and I'm still just looking like somebody else. It's like, what do I do? You can often feel stuck or like spiral into art block or burnout because of that, honestly. One too many of that will really bumming artists out because we are, we have our hearts very open. We are sensitive folk for the most part. So it's just like, take it easy on us a little bit. Just chill. If you see a piece of art and you want to say something mean on the internet, there's most likely no reason to do that. Unless the art is really awful and insulting, like they're making fun of a group of people for no reason or whatever. But even then, you do whatever you want. What do you think, Mia?
Yeah, I think that for me, the comparing somebody or comparing your art to somebody else, I think it's probably done in a harmless sort of way where it's like people like comparing things to what they know, familiar things to things they've seen already. But exactly what you said, so I'm not going to repeat that. But the other part of it is that I think all of us really like crave making something original or creative. You know what I mean? Like that's why we got into this. We want to make something new, and we maybe have the delusion on some point that what we're making is very unique and new. And so when you compare it to somebody else, they're basically saying, I've seen this before, you know? And even if
Yeah.
that's true, you don't want to hear that. So there's mind at times where it's like, and again, to sort of segue from this point, if you do hear the same thing over and over again in your career, I think some people then start changing. You know what I mean? Like there are some people that ignore that and are good at ignoring it, but I just think a pile up of the same comment for the most part has an effect on how you start seeing your art. Maybe you start avoiding that thing, and so it can have an effect. And yeah, anyway, that's something to think
It
about
can
too.
definitely help you find your voice. You
Yeah.
know, if you say, okay, well, if whatever it is I'm doing, subject matter, brushstrokes, color palette, whatever it is that I'm doing that is making people compare me to somebody else or multiple somebody else's, what is it that about me, my personality, my experiences that I can infuse into my work to
Mm-hmm.
make it stand out from that pack? And that's usually where brand new clients pop up. All of a
Yeah.
sudden you've said, I'm going to leave behind what inspired me, what the training wheels, I'm going to drop that because I don't need that anymore. And I'm going to make my own thing. And that's when people say, can you do that for us? Are you busy? Are you available? And you go, oh my God, is that all it took?
Eric, you
Wow.
make it seem like dropping the training wheels are so simple. Can you tell us more about that process?
It's not simple. It took me like 15 years.
It
Oh
was
my
literally
God.
like, that meme where it's just like how to draw an owl, like just like draw a circle and then draw the rest of the fucking owl. Like that's what it felt. Oh yeah, just drop the training wheels and you're
Yeah.
fine. It's just like that is
Yeah,
that
just
is
Yeah.
not
evolve
easy.
and you're good. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
evolve and you'll flourish. You'll be
Yeah.
fine.
No, but I actually talked to my students about that. So I actually created a little Venn diagram that helps them kind of figure out like a direction for their art, and it combines their interests, movies and film that they like, um, a list of all their favorite artists and entertainment, and then just like personality, like what do you like, what do you like to do, what kind of art do you like to create, what genre do you like to create art in, and you put that all together, and then like right there in the center is you, right?
Yeah.
And once you have that, if you're still hearing the comparisons, it doesn't even matter anymore because you know that you came at that art with, like, you found your truth. So it doesn't even matter what anybody says anymore about comparing you to anybody else. You know that you weren't looking at that person or people. Um, but that's, I have a lot of people that ask me that, like, how do you find your style? How do you do this? How do you do that? But for me, getting feedback online, that unsolicited advice, I was telling Mia the other day, yesterday actually, it stings when you know they're right.
Hmm.
You just didn't want to hear it, especially if the artist is really good and they like take your piece and they paint over it and then they send you back a JPEG and they're like, here, do this.
And it's better.
And you're like, oh, come on. Right. So And then you have to sit there and pout for a minute and go, why didn't I think of that? I knew
Yep.
that. I could have done that. But it's like they just took your whole painting and just rubbed it in your face and like, no, it's like
Just take this.
no emojis, nothing like that. They just said, do it like this. Here.
Yeah, it seems so easy.
Yeah,
Right.
so easy. Well, honestly, no feedback is worse than the self-feedback that you give yourself when you flip the canvas horizontally.
When you what?
When you flip the canvas horizontally. And you're like, oh boy, like
Yeah.
everything is wrong.
It's like upside down.
Well,
Bad.
the whole like just flipping like that mirror reverse of your image.
Exactly.
I had never done that before until one of my students said, "Hey, what does this look like in, in reverse?" So I was like, "I don't know, like the same." Like just real confident in my ability. So I flipped it. The eyes were all
you
like
sweet
wobbly.
summer
And
child.
like, oh no.
Wait, when did
It's a
you first
little,
discover doing that, Eric?
yeah.
When?
Never even thought about it.
I cannot believe that you hadn't thought about it until you were a professor.
Nope.
That's
I was
crazy.
never one of those people that had a mirror and was like, yeah, that looks good. Nope.
Wow.
I actually
If it
heard an
looked good to
artist.
my eyes, that was it.
Yeah. I heard an artist that was like, his justification for not doing it was like, my painting is not meant to be viewed like that. So I don't, that
Fair.
doesn't help. But I think the point is, it's not that it looks just as good flipped. It's that you might see things like you just said, that the eye line is off, it's easier to see when it's in a different direction than how
It
you
shifts your
staring at it 'cause you
perspective.
have blinders on. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Same with like things like hue and saturation, like just doing it completely grayscale, like when you're checking your values, like it helps you see the holistic picture
Yeah.
outside of like, because like when you're working on something, you're in it. So when you're giving yourself feedback, or when you get feedback from somebody else, especially a trusted friend or an artist, and I rip it apart, but they haven't spent time with it. They haven't been immersed in it and like in this space. And so they have the advantage of being able to see it from that bird's eye view. It is so hard for like when you're working on a piece to see it like that. And so you need to get outside of your head a little bit and look at it through somebody else's eyes. And of course, their opinion is not always going to be like, sometimes objectively, it's just going to be a pretty good opinion. But for the most part, a lot of it is subjective because it's through their own lens. So I think it's really important to also to distinguish how to take feedback with a grain of salt. And I think a lot of artists tend to go like one extreme or another. Sorry, I'm hearing noises in my house, and I hope it's my cats. A lot of artists like
I
tend
hope
to.
it is too.
This is what a cat owner's life is like. I just like don't know if like somebody's going to be behind me or not. That's really fun. But yeah, I think that a lot of artists tend to look at it from one extreme or the other. It's like either they get feedback and they're like, oh, well, I don't agree with that, so I don't have to listen. Or from the other end where they just like take the feedback one for one because they're just tired of thinking about it. And you really have to apply your own sensibility and your own instincts to a piece that you're working on once you've received feedback from a trusted source, like a professor or a peer or somebody who is a professional, like or has, somebody you admire. Because even sometimes that feedback is not quite what your actual plan was like in your heart. And it is really important to understand like what are absolutes for you and what you can bend on, because sometimes like the subject matter means something to you, and so you have a reason why you put that there in the first place. So it's important to distinguish that, I think.
Totally.
Yeah. Like what I have one of my students that he loves to do paint overs of other students' works, whether they asked for it or not. Like, that he's just offering his feedback, constructive criticism of like, here's what you could do to make this piece better. But what ends up happening sometimes is when I see people do that is they're making corrections to your piece. They're doing what they would do, not necessarily what makes the piece better, just makes it different. So I've had to tell students, especially the ones that want to flip a table after somebody has written this long essay about all the different structural things that are wrong with their piece, and do a little light paint over that makes it different. I say there's a difference. There's different and there's better.
Mm.
What you were told, your piece is strong, but what you were told doesn't make it better, just makes it different. It's through that person's point of view, what their artistic sensibilities say, let me pump up the saturation, let me do this, let me do that. But if that's not the mood that you were going for, that's not what you're going to get.
That's such a great point, Eric.
Yeah.
Because that actually happened to me at a workshop, and I felt like because the person giving me the paint over was a industry professional, that I had to listen to them. But I realized that it was actually, they were kind of giving me feedback based on their aesthetic, and it was not my aesthetic at all. And especially like if your style, like back then, my style was completely different too, and it was probably hard for people to wrap their heads around. But it's like things like that can be kind of confusing early on in your career too, where you're like, how do I know if it's making it better or if it's just that person's taste and style? And knowing how to differentiate that takes a lot of trust in your gut at a point in your life where maybe you don't have a lot of evidence. Trusting your gut is a good thing, like, so that's a great distinction to just have in mind. And the other thing too is what you think communicates, and maybe this is more of a writing note, but I think it works in painting and drawing as well. What you think communicates because you've been staring at it for so long probably doesn't communicate, and that's what that person's giving feedback in response to, because they don't know actually what you're trying to do. And that might sound like they're trying to change your vision or change the approach of your piece, but it's like a lack of communication,
Yeah.
it's not as clear as you thought it was.
That is actually a really good point too. Something because I'm an art director, I have experience in giving feedback, and that part is something that I had to learn over time how to do, was to actually, like, no matter if I was giving feedback to a friend or professionally giving feedback, understanding what the context is and where, like, what the purpose of the piece was. Is this meant to tell a story? Is it meant to just be a whimsical thing? Is it meant to communicate a certain idea? Is this meant to go into a game or a show or used for something else? All those things are very important, because understanding what the purpose of the piece is essential in actually giving the feedback. Because again, the communication aspect, if you don't know anything about the piece aside from it exists, then the feedback you're going to give is completely different from if you know what it's going to. So I was at a sketch night recently here in Atlanta, and we were all just like sitting around drawing and talking, which was great. And one of the people who were there, an artist, like found out I was an art director and like, slid a sketchbook over to me, and he was like, "Hey, can you give me feedback on this piece?" And it was like a concept for an illustration. And I was looking at it and I was like, I could give you feedback, but first tell me what you're trying to communicate here. And then he was able to set the stage, and then I was able to properly give feedback, because otherwise I would have just jumped in there blind and would have just applied all of my sensibilities to it rather than given him anything that was actually constructive to help him convey his idea that he wanted to convey better. So that question was really important. What are you trying to communicate with this piece? And that's like number one in giving feedback, and also receiving feedback too, because if you don't know what you're trying to communicate, then you should probably evaluate that before before continuing.
Yeah. And even knowing what it's for, right? Is it a fine art piece? Is it, is it supposed to be a book cover? Like all that kind of stuff too, where it's supposed to end up, you might give different feedback for that stuff. And I'm sure that comes up in portfolio reviews where somebody's giving you a portfolio that's not at all towards the industry they're saying they want.
Yep.
And that's the feedback that would help them more. It's like,
all the time. All the time. Have you ever seen a student's portfolio where you can tell what they're really excited about, but they put all the stuff in front of it because I think that's what they're supposed to do? And like you see this one piece that's just like shining, but it's different than everything else. And you're like, why is that buried in the corner? Like you're ashamed of it. Like tell me more about this. What is this? Because their intent, they're like, what is in them is being communicated there, but they think that they're like, I ought to, instead of I want to do this. Like I feel that there's a stark difference there too.
Totally. Even
Yeah.
just style wise, just people trying to match a studio style too to get work from there, and they might be like suppressing something cooler that they would do on their own, like that's a tough goal.
Nothing breaks my heart more than seeing that. I'm like, oh, you don't know that that's not what you do. I mean, you can, but like, what's the point? Like that studio has, I'm getting off topic. This is something that really like, it makes me so sad and also frustrates me. Because that studio already has plenty of artists who can do that style, like you're trying to do that. But anyway, yeah. your personal voice is the reason why people, you know, are attracted to the things that you make, especially if you want to stand out as an illustrator or an artist with a distinctive style. Even as an animator, even though changing your style is a part of the job, having a point of view and understanding why you like the things that you like and why you create the things that you create helps you become a better animator, a better artist, better anywhere you go, because you have a foundation with which to pull from. And that foundation could be anything that you love, but if you love it, that shows through in your art no matter what. And then studios will hire you for that, or clients will hire you for that, or people will buy your art for that. So, yeah, I think that a lot of the feedback that I have given students is that I can't see their voice or personality because they're trying to be everything at once instead of who they are as a person.
I remember, I may have already talked about this. I don't remember who I say these things to, but back in the spring of '99,
Oh boy.
I was working on portfolio samples at SVA, and I was doing this one illustration of it was a sci-fi illustration with a black guy in it and like an astronaut surrounded by other aliens and a whole thing. And I was really into it. I was gonna sculpt all the aliens and do all this stuff, and I was working on it in the school's like kind of like community workshop room on the top floor of the main building. And I remember this guy, this graphic designer, there's another black student, walks past me and he's looking over my shoulder and he goes, "What are you doing that for? There's no black people in sci-fi. There's nobody hiring that for that." And
Oh
he like
no.
walks away like chuckling. And
Chuckling?
like yeah, I remember it. I probably exaggerated it in my brain, but it wasn't like like I don't know. I just know he was laughing. But it was one of those things where then I had to go and think I had to prove him wrong and
Hmm.
say, well, he's got to be wrong. So I went to Barnes and Noble, I went to Walden Books, looking at the bookshelves and
Walden Books,
trying to
throwback.
find any example, anything that I could show him and say, well, Tor's doing it, and or like Bane or Random House or whatever the publisher. Here's black characters and there's sci-fi. Not one book. I couldn't find anything. So I left it out of my portfolio.
Hmm.
I purposely didn't. I finished the painting, but I never showed it to anybody. And I left black characters out of my portfolio for the next 15 years of my career because I kept hearing that kid in my head. So nobody wants this. Nobody's
Hmm.
hiring for that. So to your point, like you see a portfolio that's got that gem in it and it's buried because the person is painting what they think everybody wants to see.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I buried a ton of my personal voice that was screaming to come out.
Yeah.
Because I could literally go to the bookstore and see that there was no art director, no publisher putting out into the world what I wanted to be painting. And it was, you kind of have to shrug it off and figure out how to have some kind of career or give up.
Mm.
There were plenty of other black illustrators before me that had to do the same thing. You shrug it off and find some way to make a living, or you give up and find something else to do. And those people either went into painting romance covers or children's books, or they went into comics or whatever it is that they decided to do, but it wasn't them. They were just a hired wrist. They were rendering whatever it was that was asked of them, but it wasn't their voice. It wasn't, you could see that they wanted to do something else, but their work just looked boring, you
Yeah.
know? But it wasn't until many years later into their career that they just said, F this, I'm going to paint what I want. That all of a sudden things started happening for them. And it's interesting how somebody's words or reaction to your work can have an either a positive or a detrimental effect on your life,
Yeah.
your psyche. You're either going to be really anxious when you put that passion into your portfolio and show it to an art director, or you're going to be really positive because you know that it's, I don't know, something that they might be interested in. But I don't know, it's something that I had to deal with uh for years. So
Yeah. What is Mia, I'm curious too, what has been your experience with receiving feedback from influential people? Like, have you had a formative piece of feedback that shifted the course of anything for you?
I mean, I have mentioned it before and I won't get into it too much because it's a little too personal, but I had a similar thing to what Eric's talking about when it came to writing, and I didn't write for 13 years. So, uh,
Oh man.
yeah, I just, after hearing that, what I heard, I basically realized, decided no one wants to hear from me. Like, I have nothing of value to share with the world when it comes to writing, so I will stick to art. And ever since I was a kid, I wanted to write and illustrate my own books, but it was like getting that in, that experience in college basically destroyed that for 13 years for me. So yeah.
Jeez.
And that's why I get really upset when I read these accounts, when people are brave enough to share these experiences like on Twitter or just like, and stuff like that, where teachers did that to them. Because it's not, in your case, it was a student, Eric, but a lot of teachers do that for students, and I don't know if it's like a power trip or it's just like they're very opinionated or whatever it is, but I just like think that it's such a responsibility to be an instructor, especially an art teacher, because
Yeah.
you don't know what you could be crushing in a student, especially somebody like me that is like very anxiety ridden, and it doesn't take much to make me feel discouraged about pursuing something personal. But and I was not the only student that this teacher did this to, apparently, even though we complained about it, he kept doing it. So yay.
It's awful.
But yeah, I just feel like there's definitely like the kind of feedback we were talking about originally is kind of like more technical feedback, I guess, but there is the kind of worldview feedback or a personal point of view feedback like this that can have a pretty strong effect. And that's why I think it is good to be careful if you're somebody imparting that feedback, about careful about how it's transmitted, if you are an authority figure and if you're not, because you don't know who's on the other side of that in terms of like where they're at in life. And just always try to remember it's a human being creating something, and that's something, not to sound corny, but there's something really sacred about that you don't know what you're tampering with if you don't do it carefully. So
Yeah. It definitely is a big responsibility.
yeah.
Um, because and that when you're in school, especially, like it's so formative for a new artist to get a piece of feedback after they've had their first experience really opening up and bearing their soul, and then it just gets crushed. And it's just like that is so discouraging. There's ways to give feedback where you can be constructive. It's constructive feedback versus destructive feedback. And oftentimes a lot of old school professors, especially, will be like, oh, like, well, I have to give them the tough love because that's what I experienced when I was an artist and blah, blah, blah. And you have to, have a tough skin to make it. But you can't put that on every single person because not everybody is the same. People people need encouragement as well as the truth. And there's ways to give that while also telling them how they can improve and get better. But in my experience as well, I remember I got feedback when I was in high school going to college, and had gone to this pre-college portfolio review. And this guy, I brought my portfolio all happy and I was like, here you go. And it was just all my drawings that I did in high school. Like they didn't really have much rhyme or reason, but it was things that I enjoyed drawing. And some of them, because I wanted to show off technical skills, were photo reference things or still life stuff like that. But he saw some of those photo reference things and he was like, well, why are you ripping off National Geographic? Like, why? Like, really, just like brutal to me. And he was just like, I just like, there's nothing here that I see that I'm really like, enjoying. Like, just tore down everything that he saw, and then disparaged the things that were personal to me that were kind of like more anime styled, because of course I was one of those anime kids back in high school. But they had a lot of my own personal point of view, even back then, because I looked back at it, you know, at this age, and I'm like, I can see where I was coming from. I don't know what that guy was talking about. Like there was a lot of content here that showed kind of the direction I could go in, but I was really wary of trying a lot of new things after that and kind of just stuck to the assignments in most of college. And then another situation happened when I was in grad school. We were in a class where this like big comic artist had come to visit, and I showed him the pitch that I had been working on for maybe about 4 years from undergrad to grad school that I really was putting so much effort and energy into, and made a good showing of that as well. And he looked at that, he was like, this is cool, but nobody's going to want this. Similar to you, Eric. There, it was like a, you know, female protagonist, and she was like, you know, this like kind of um this character that was like very action focused, and he was like, well, nobody's going to want to see that, like nobody's going to want to see this female protagonist like, you know, doing these things. They're going to want to change all of it and blah blah blah. And it was really discouraging to me too. I wanted to prove him wrong, but at that point I was burned out, and I never revisited that because I think that in the back of my head that was always going, that like nobody's going to want this. And it cut to now where there's a bunch of shows, you know, on Netflix and Disney Plus and things like that, where there are female action protagonists. And I was like, man, if I stuck with it, I wonder, like, could that have been a thing? Maybe it wouldn't have, but I would have loved to found out. So I think a better way to approach stuff like that would be to say, like that first guy would be to say, oh, like, I see that you're using photo reference. Maybe take that photo reference and make it something that's your own next time. Or with the guy who was critiquing my pitch, he was like, you know, this may be something that is harder to get past networks because they want something that's more predictable or something that they know will make money. But you should stick with it anyway and see how it goes, just to see if maybe it's time for a shakeup. Something that is encouraging and building while also letting the student know that there's more work to be done here, but there's potential here at the same time. And sometimes there's just straight up not, which, you know, is rough to deal with. But for the most part, there's usually something there. There's some kind of glimmer of who the person is, and that's what you have to kind of pick out and elevate rather than tear down the entire thing.
Yeah,
So I felt
build
like
them
that was
up before you tear them down. I mean, it's something that
yeah.
it's something that is taught to teachers. You know, public school, college, they're supposed to do that. They're supposed to. They're not supposed to be a jaded mess walking into a classroom and going, crap, crap, pedestrian.
That's not helpful.
Yeah.
But I remember being in a figure painting class, and the son of a really famous sci-fi illustrator was just like moderating the class at the time. And a guy sitting next to me said that he had asked for feedback on one of the paintings, one of the portrait paintings that he was doing in class. And this, you know, popular illustrator looked at his stuff and then looked at the kid and said, why are you here? Like, it was just like, but in a kind of a, you know, had this disdain in his voice, looked at his like as if his stuff was crap, and like, why are you even here? And it really messed with this guy. Like, he sat next to me, and we were all painting the model, and he just sat there. And I asked him, like, why aren't you painting? And he told me that story, and I was like, wow, that's like a punch in the face. That's like punching an artist in the face. You know, he's doing the best he could. So instead of just telling him, here's how to mix flesh tones, here's how to block in your form and blah, 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 here's how to structure the face, why are you here?
And it's like students aren't there to perform, they're there to learn and get better.
Exactly.
And it's like, it's just taking that concept completely out. And it's, and you actually bringing that up in terms of the student mentality. I think a lot of us are very, maybe I should just speak for myself, I was more defensive as a student or when I was a younger artist, because I felt like I had to perform even in front of teachers I liked, you know, like, or I admired, where I was like, I thought getting feedback from them saying my painting or drawing wasn't good was the worst thing that can happen, because it's like I wasn't good enough. And that's not the point. Like, when at any point in your career, you could always learn, but especially when you're a student and especially when you're at the start of your career. So that's what that made me think about, where it's like, I'd find myself finding a reason to, like, if there was feedback given by a teacher, I'd have to defend my choice, even though it was the wrong choice. Like, you don't have to do that. It's okay. It's okay
Yeah.
if you made a mistake, but it's that fear of being wrong when you should be okay with being wrong at that point. But yeah, that's,
I wish they taught more art students. I mean, I wish as an art student that I had that mentality of just learning versus performing, because I felt that when you're in art school, you see all these artists around you and everybody puts their art up on a wall next to each other. You are actively competing
yeah.
with everybody else in that room instead of just understanding that I don't know everything. So I want to glean everything that I can to get better at what I do. And so critique is a good thing as long as it is constructive. And this understanding of what other people can do is a good thing, because it helps me understand like what's possible, what's out there, what am I capable of doing? How do I learn and grow? But instead, oftentimes all of us are just like in competition. I was like, I want to outshine that person. I want to prove that professor wrong. I want to blah blah blah. I want to be the best in class. Like, I think I would have learned so much more if I had a learning mindset rather than a competition mindset.
Yeah.
And art school kind of actively pits you against each other in that way.
It's interesting that you say that, because my classes were a mixture of both.
Mm-hmm.
Like I remember my head of the illustration department was my instructor for my second year, and it was a 3-hour class. He would tap the wall with all of our stuff on it, like you were saying, and say, I'm not going to stand here and talk for 3 hours. What do you guys think? Like, what about this one? What about this one?
Oh man.
And we were all kind of really sheepish at first. Well, it's nice. I like the colors. And he's like, no, we're not here to pat each other on the back. We're not here to pinch each other's cheeks. What's wrong with this piece? And we're like, oh,
Oh, this is the real deal.
yeah. Oh yeah. So within, like, we would start off like, what's right with it, what's working and what's not.
Mhm.
Right. So we learned how to give a critique, a constructive critique, not being mean, but telling the truth. And you didn't want anybody to tell the truth about your piece next week or the week after that. So we grew artistically because we didn't want to hear from this mofo's mouth over here or her, or you just wanted to come in, put it on the wall, and have people go, damn.
Mhm.
You're like, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. It's good. Yeah.
Right.
Like,
So
like that vindication is very important. But yeah, I like that structure of having the group of people understand how to talk about art. I think that's really, really important. Something that I started to do with I call them my knee folk, because they're my non-binary nibbling, I guess, which is nibbling is such a weird word. So knee folk I say instead. But this my knee folk is a 14-year-old who draws and loves art as well. And I see a lot of myself in them because interested in the same things, drawing a lot of the same subject matter, like, anime, magical girls or whatever. And so I'm like, okay, like I want them to start looking at their work critically, but I also don't want to tear it down. Like I give constructive critique when I can, but I want them to start to gain a better eye for art. So what I started having them do was to look at my art and say, okay, here you go. Look at this. Here's a piece that I did. I want you to tell me what you think could be better about this piece. So to let them know that someone who they look up to and admire can also have things that they can improve in their art, to know that there's always something to grow towards and to build towards, and also to understand how to talk about things, rather than just say, oh, that's so cool. I'm just like, okay, it's cool, but tell me how it could be cooler.
Mhm.
And that allows you to build that eye for art, to understand how your work could be cooler. So through that, like actually critiquing somebody that you admire is actually a really good way to grow yourself too, because you know that like no matter what level somebody's at, there's probably something that could, still be adjusted and fixed, and to understand like what could be built up. It helps gain a better understanding of the entire piece of art. So I think that technique has been really good. And so periodically I'll come, when I come home, I will do that and be like, okay, I want you to look at this piece. And it'll be something that I'm proud of. And then they'll point out something and I'm like, oh, you noticed that. It's like, I feel kind of seen right now. Like sometimes the critique be hidden. I'm like, oh, okay. I see you. But it's like it's good because it's building that awareness.
Yeah.
Do you feel like ego has any effect on how you receive feedback?
Oh God, it's like almost everything.
And I think that's why, at least for me as a younger artist, I had a harder time hearing feedback than I do now. Like I want feedback, and in fact, if somebody's only
Same.
giving me good feedback, I'm like, where's the other shoe? Like I'm like, please, please tell me how you really feel. Like that's my assumption is like there's something I can fix. Whereas when I was younger, it was the opposite. I was like, I don't want them to tell me what to fix because I want to hear that it's good and that it's ready and that it's done. And
Yeah.
part of it is because it takes so long to make art that it felt more painful to maybe get a finish when I was, no, that's still true. But I guess I'm more realistic now in the sense that it's like, it doesn't matter how much time I put in a piece, there could still be something I didn't see and there's something that could be improved, you know?
What do
Um,
you think leads from that ideal of not wanting to receive critique to wanting actively to receive critique? Like what has to happen before you get to that point in your artistic growth?
for me personally, it was the pain of not having gotten that feedback. Like if somebody told me it was great and then later I see the problems in it, I wish someone had told me. Like when that pain of not getting the feedback is worse than getting it, you know?
Yeah. What about you, Eric?
What was the question?
What what created the mindset of wanting to receive I don't know if you were a person who didn't want to receive critique when you were younger. But are you more open to critique now than you were when you were like a student, for example? Or did you always want critique?
I I always wanted critique, but I was picky about who I would accept it from.
Mm, that's fair.
I am all for hearing what anybody has to say if I know that they know what they're talking about.
Bingo.
Don't come at me and talk about proportion, anatomy, painting. This is what works in a sci-fi illustration. Don't say nothing if you can't back it up yourself. That was my whole philosophy. Like, who are you? Because when we would have guest instructors come in and be like, this, you should do this and this, I would immediately run to the nearest computer to look and see if they had a website and see if they could back it up. Because otherwise I would just take everything that they said to me and I would just throw it out. Get
Like, I
away.
don't need this.
Like, what you're talking about. But yeah, I try not to be like that now, especially when I had a student say, "Why don't you flip the image?" And my eyes are over here.
You're like, damn it. I didn't
So
need to see that.
yeah, so I've humbled myself, but back in my 20s, I'd be like, quickly, who are you? Who are you again? Hell out of
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, I think for me it was patience. Um, when I was younger, I was very impatient and I just wanted the piece to be done. And I had a feeling, I had an idea of what I wanted to accomplish and I wanted to put it down there. And I had a best friend who I would also like just always draw alongside with. And I think in middle school we had like graded each other's sketchbooks and I was like, she graded all my stuff all harsh. I was like, why is she so mean to my stuff? Like, why would she do that? Blah, blah, blah. But like, I look back and realize I'm like, I was just kind of rushing through making art because I just wanted to draw as many things as possible and didn't really think about how good it was or what I was you actively making. But as I got older, I wanted better quality. I wanted to understand better of what I was making, and I had more patience to actually spend the quality time with it to make it the best piece possible. Oftentimes if I was working on a piece and I got critique after I started coloring it, I wouldn't, I just, even if I knew it would help, I wouldn't take it because I was too impatient to go back and revisit all these things and fix it all up now. Now, when I'm done a piece and I see something that I don't like, I'm like, I'm gonna go ahead and fix that, even if it's completely finished. I'm like, listen, I'm gonna turn off my layers and paint right over this thing and reline art it. I'm like, I don't care. I know that I need to fix this in order to make this better. And I don't mind spending that extra effort now because now for me, it's much more about quality than it is about quantity. So I have the patience to actually, be more critical about my own pieces and want it to be the best that it can. So yeah, for me, it was just becoming more mature as an artist is really what it was.
So we've covered unsolicited, we've covered talking through the internet, giving feedback like that, feedback from in school. But like, how do you handle being told about your work by a manager or a coworker? Like, how do you handle that in the workplace? Because there's a lot of people that take that college flip a table if anybody tells me anything negative about my work, and they go right into an actual job where somebody's saying, nope, do it again. What do you mean do it again? This is gold. I'm giving you gold.
Which angle do you want me to come at this from? Because I have
Any.
so much experience in doing this. Oh God, I mean, there's so many stories to tell because I started working as as a background artist in animation. So every single scene that I worked on was up for critique from a manager. And the first manager that I had was a very temperamental. Well, no, not the first one. The second manager that I had was a very temperamental type of person. So on a good day, sometimes those pieces would just fly and just be approved immediately. And on a bad day, you would never know what you were going to get. I remember, I think one of my coworkers had said that oftentimes he would submit a piece and he would get feedback on it that was like probably ridiculous. And then he would like wait an hour and then submit the same piece. And it would get passed.
Corn after a Snickers bar.
Yeah, he would wait until after lunch and like send the piece again and it would get approved without changing anything.
Wow, that's smart.
And so that was just like, it's interesting because it's so dependent on who the person is that is critiquing the piece. And then when I went to games, oftentimes then because you're not surrounded by only artists and you had like a much more eyes on your work outside of just your team, oftentimes a designer or an engineer even would like give feedback. And I'm like, I don't think. And so then you have to learn how to defend your work against people who want to add their own input because sometimes they just want to say something or sometimes they really feel like something, even if they don't have the expertise to back it up. And I think that's when you, as the artist, as the professional, because you're in the studio now, you have to know how to talk about your work and you have to know why you made the decisions that you made. So I had to get really good at this because there are some people who have a big ego and want to say something in a meeting no matter what. And you have to be like, okay, so here's why we can't do that. And then you have to lay it all out. So I think it's really important to have a good presence of mind and a good sense of what you're making and why you're making it in order to really back up something that you're creating. Because yeah, you never know when that bomb is going to come out of nowhere and flip the table or try to flip the table. And sometimes you just don't have the power to change it. And that's really, really annoying. But you have to hope that your manager will advocate for you. And sometimes they don't always do so. So yeah, it's a process for sure. On the other end of that, as a manager / art director, critiquing other people, I've had to deal with a lot of different personality types over the years. And the hardest to deal with is older men who are older than me, who are just over it. And they don't want this young upstart, this woman giving them feedback about their art. And I still distinctly remember I was giving feedback to one of my my reports and I was like, hey, like, adjust this, fix this color, blah blah blah. And like he just like stopped and like looked at me and he was like, are you giving me feedback because it's going to make it better? Or are you giving me feedback because that's how you want it to be? And I was just like, who do you think he's talking to? Like, I'm still your manager. But then I went I went home and thought about it. And I was like, that's actually a good question because there is a distinction, even though he's coming at it from his ego and all that stuff. But there is actually a distinction between the feedback that you give as a personal, your personal taste versus what actually works for the game. Just because you have one solution doesn't mean that another solution is the wrong solution, unless it's not working for the product it's being made for. If it looks different than how you anticipated it, but it still works, it still works. And you have to know when to let it go. So that moment was actually really formative for me because it made me distinguish between my own personal feedback and what actually works for the thing. And so then at that point on, I had to just develop language for it to say, okay, this works. This doesn't work for the game because it doesn't fit with the color language that we have established, or the shape language, or it's just like aesthetically, it just looks different. Adjust it to be this way instead because it works for the game. And then you have your hard and true examples that you cite. It becomes more objective than subjective. So that's how I had to start to approach things and improve in being a manager and art director. And that's a lesson I just took forward with me. So even though that dude's ego was ruling that, there was a lesson to be learned there for me too.
That's really big of you to see through that though, because I think some people do kind of take the surface response and don't go past that to see what you could get out of it. Because maybe he didn't even mean that, but you got a lesson out of it. I think that's pretty amazing. But
I mean, I learned something. I mean, that's like just like to actually listen and really analyze the situation. Because my surface response would have been, because I said so. That's why.
And I think that was my initial response was just like, do it. Like, just, you have to do this right now. Like, don't argue with me. I didn't say it like that, but basically that. But then, yeah, that lesson came, it like kind of sunk in, and I was like, actually, he's got a point. Because if you look at it holistically, it's like, if it looks good, it's like, oh, okay, like, it's not how I would have approached it, but it still works. So yeah, it's yeah, it was a tough pill to swallow, but sometimes you got to swallow those pills, especially when you're a leader, because you really do have to understand how to best serve the artists who are your reports as well, and be a good manager, and actually learn how to hear them rather than just mandate things at them. Um, I think it's a big part of being a good manager is understanding your team. So I mean, I there's so many lessons that I've learned from being an art director and a manager. And I don't want to go over all of them now because I don't want to just like run this thing, but it's been it's been a growth, not just for me as a person who works, but also in my personal life of how to communicate things directly and clearly, about how to formulate my language, about when to bring things up, about when to, like what to fight for and what not to fight for, like all those things I learned, like just managing other people and dealing with different personalities. It's been very interesting.
that's super valuable stuff. And I think that those of us who are independent artists don't have a lot of practice with that. And then if you then do a project where you are working with other people, all that stuff comes into play. So,
Yeah.
and actually what's difficult at times too is like we've been talking a lot about artists giving feedback to artists or teachers giving feedback to artists and stuff, but and even like art directors that have an art background like you, but then there's a whole nother level when it's like a non-artist giving feedback. And there, I think a lot of the communication stuff that falls apart is just how we talk about our art does not translate to people who don't make art in
Yes.
a lot of ways. And even just talking about the process and stuff, I think they probably just like zone out at some point, you know? And it's like learning how to explain what you're trying to do in a way that's will communicate to them is a skill. And I think the people
Yes.
have that skill that can communicate across like creatives and non-creatives like will be employed for life because that's like a rare skill.
It's not easy because yeah, when you're working, independent or in a studio, you deal with clients who don't have the language to communicate what they want out of you. And so you really have to be like a client whisperer and interpret that non-creative feedback into what you think they're actually going for. So it's such a challenge to try to figure that out, but it's like taking the average of everything that they have said and like kind of congealing it into like the central thing. It's like, okay, I think this is the common denominator of everything that was here. I hope this is correct. And it always comes with mixed results because people have an idea, they think they have an idea in their head and they don't quite know what it is. Um, I recently had to deal with that actually. Where somebody who was not like non-creative or like didn't have the language to speak creatively was wanting a certain result out of something that I already thought looked good personally. I thought it was great. And I was like, I don't know what they want. And it got to the point where I was actually doing live like revisions for them, like on camera. And they were still just like, I don't know, I'll come back to it later. And like I was like, you know what? And I just like thought about it for a while. I sat with it and like looked at all the things that we had all tried to do for this person. And I was like, I think I know what they want. And I just cobbled something together really, really quick and sent that to them, like after like kind of narrowing it down from everything that they didn't want and be like, is this what you want? And they're like, oh yeah, I like that. Okay, cool. And I was like, great, that took 10 minutes. Let's do it. Because like sometimes there's an idea that is formed from everything that was rejected.
Mhm.
And the no's give you as much information as the yeses do, oftentimes when a client doesn't know what they want. So it's important to kind of observe the no's and see what didn't work and what was not congealing there. But again, that's a toss up and that comes with mixed results. But you develop an eye for it the more you have to go through it. And unfortunately, it is a process. As long as you get there in the end. I'm really curious if either of y'all had any nightmare clients that you've worked with that put you through the ringer in that way.
I'm just like, yes. And
Can you not talk about it?
yeah, it's like I gotta without naming them. Yeah, I've dealt with companies where they had a whole design by committee kind of approach to looking at the art, and everybody from the art director to the random accountant had a say in what the finished piece looked like. And they'd all be in on the meeting, and I knew that my art was being projected onto a wall or on the screen, and somebody would look up from tweeting, to say, "Yeah, I think his ears look a little small," and then they go back to their phone, and you just like, God damn. So
that's awful.
yeah. So then the comments, I get the laundry list of comments, feedback, and you could read it and go, okay, well, this is from random so and so that didn't even belong in the room, and this is from the art director, okay, but you gotta appease everybody,
Mm.
and I hate that, but you also want to get paid.
Yep.
So you just go, all right, fine, but I I am learning that I don't have tact. There's a way of responding to emails. There's a way of responding that just says, okay, cool. All right, no problem. Like, I'll get it done. And then there's a dry kind of response that makes it sound like I'm super pissed off when I'm not, but it sounds really hard unless I throw some emojis into my email. But I've just had to, when I get like hard feedback on a project, I've learned to write my response, save it as a draft, and come back an hour later and go, whoa, glad I didn't send that. Delete, like recompose it, or just say, okay, cool, coming up, whatever. But I've learned not to follow up with feedback from a client with questions about like why they even wanted the changes or this or that. Just say, do what they're asking you to do because somebody in that room wanted it, and do what they're asking so you can get paid. This is a job. This is not something that you probably would have done for your own personal portfolio or just for your own personal enjoyment. This is a job. They came to you for a reason. Give them what they came for and move on. So you got to keep that professionalism without going, let me tell you guys about yourselves. So.
Well, yeah. Yeah, there's a balance there because I think that another lesson that I learned just like working as a freelancer and being a client and all the different things is like knowing when to fight for something versus knowing when to let it go. Because sometimes the feedback is bad. Like sometimes it's just objectively bad. And I'm like, I could do this if they want their illustration to look worse. but there's a specific reason why I'm not making that decision. And you have to figure out like what is your line to fight for. Like if you know uh that you cannot live with yourself if you complete the piece the way a client is asking. And sometimes they're wrong. Like sometimes they just don't know and they think that that's the right solution. And I think it is important to know like what that line is for you, because sometimes I'll be like, okay, here's why I made this decision. And I'll just like break it down like in a very polite way. But if I have something, if I have a way to back it up, oftentimes they will go along with that and be like, "Oh, okay, okay, I'll see how this goes then." Like I trust you. You're the artist. Depending on who you're working with, if you know the personality, some clients are not going to be here for that. But yeah, it's kind of like that's my middle ground. Is like finding when my fights are and when they're not there. But what about you, Mia? I want to hear from you too if you've had any experience with difficult critiques from clients.
Yeah, I think it's like either like a lack of communication when that happens, or like the one time I probably the worst like commission experience was I realized like late into the project, oh, this person wanted a painting I've sold already, and they're just basically trying to get me to repaint that piece without repainting it, and they're just never
Uh,
going to be happy. And so it's like I think finding that kind of stuff out as soon as possible when it comes to personal work, obviously, but even like if it's client work, right, where they might be using a piece of reference that's like something that's already out there, and they keep trying, they're not happy with anything, and then you realize, oh, they just want this thing but my version, right? Or but finding that out the sooner, sooner than later is helpful. But that kind of stuff can explain a lot, where it's just like maybe what the client wants is not possible because it would literally be plagiarism, or literally in my case
yeah,
repainting something I've already done that I'm not interested in doing again. And that lack of communication can waste so much time, just like chew up so much time.
it
So it's
really
just
can.
important to get at the bottom of that. But another thing I was thinking about, again, trying to vague book here because I don't want to make it obvious what I'm
Yeah.
talking about, but it's like um as simple as just like trying to, they think they're being clear with their feedback and you think you understand it, and it's still not like they're still not happy with it. So there's just so many things like that too, where it's just like if you're really not clear on what they want to, it's okay to ask. It's like in the past I've
Yeah.
been afraid to like ask for more clarity because I'm like, am I just being dense here? But if it's not clear, just say so. Just be like, do you mean this or do you mean that? Like if like whatever it is, but just try to like, I guess communication I feel like is the main thing where feedback can break down, is what I'm trying to get at.
100%. Um, and like my call, if is I don't know if there's any like potential clients or like things like that listening who commission artists or what have you, but having clear references up front of what you're looking for. Um, I would say I recommend from the artist's portfolio themselves, because you're hiring them because you like their art, I'm assuming. So having an idea, like giving the artist an idea of what you liked from their body of work, and have multiple references of that and other things too that like might have inspired you. Like, if you have a project that's going towards something, because I will say for Deck of Wonders, my client did that for each card that I had to design, and that was super helpful because like even if it was like a silly like reference, like I don't know, like Stewie like doing something or whatever, like it gave me an idea of the kind of tone that he wanted me to communicate. So that really helped eliminate a lot of that guesswork that I would have had to do otherwise. So that was a really useful thing too, to like again, that's communication and making sure that your ideas are clear up front. Even if you don't have the language to speak to it, you generally know what you'd like to see. So, you know, put together what you'd like to see and put that in the packet that you send to artists. Don't send too much. So probably like like 3 to 5 images is probably enough. But that always really helps eliminate some of the guesswork there.
Yeah. Um, to piggyback off of what Mia was saying, um, the recently I had to do a test image for a very large client for a very large project. And the brief that they sent me was not clear at all. Like what about what they wanted to see from me. So I went into doing a sketch before doing the final painting, and they thought that the sketch was the final painting. They were just completely baffled, completely confused about what I was sending them. Said that, they were kind of upset because what I sent them didn't look like my book cover work. And I'm like, oh my God, Do people not send you
Oh
sketches?
no.
Like what? And it was already like my heart's beating in my chest. Like, what is going on their end that they don't understand that this is just the sketch stage? So then I had to get into a lengthy email, like explaining here's the process of an illustration, which, and I didn't throw in any emojis or like LOLs or anything like that, which probably made me sound like really mean or authoritative or whatever, like really tense. But I'm like, no, this is how it goes. Like this is step by step how you build an illustration. But I guess there are people out there, I've never met them, but that can do photorealistic work or kind of stylized realism, like straight out of their head with no reference and nail it every single time. Um, those unicorns are well, that unicorn is the one that ended up actually getting the gig, and they went with somebody else for the project. But um, if they had just told me what they wanted from the beginning, instead of being very vague about the brief, it might have turned out differently. But it all worked out in the end because other opportunities came up. But it's just, yeah, definitely ask questions if you're reading a brief from somebody, from a client, and you're like, I don't have the slightest clue what the size should be, or like what the costumes should be. What they're just saying, it's a character doing something. Like, okay, where? What's the
Yeah.
mood? What's, give me more. And if they can't give that to you, then it's all automatic red flags for me. It makes me nervous because then it's going to be a nonstop roller coaster of uh revisions and feedback where they're like, no, this isn't what we wanted, do it like this. No, that's close, but it's still not what we want. Well, then tell me what you want. What did you want?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that can be frustrating. And that's not just an amateur or in self-publisher reaching out to you, some lawyer that decided, I want to write a fantasy novel, then I want you to do my cover, and then they keep going back and forth. No, that's not right. No, it can be Fortune 500 company that's still like, we don't know how to write a brief, we're just going to let you figure it out, and if you don't figure it out, you're not going to get the job. Oh, whoopee.
It is astounding how many decision makers when it comes to art there are that do not know how to communicate about art
Like at all.
at all.
There's no language whatsoever. And wait, so were they expecting you to do a finished piece for the brief? Like for a test? Was it a
Yeah,
test?
the test I was supposed to do a polished, finished illustration.
Oh,
I
well, that's
got
your
paid
first
for it.
mistake. That's your problem right there.
I got
There's your
paid
problem.
for it,
Oh,
but
good.
it was like
That's good.
I was completely off
Mm.
doing tests anymore. I
Mhm.
had told my
Yeah.
agent no more tests. Like if the proof's not in my website, not on my website, the proof isn't in the bookstore, then they should just assume that I can't do it.
Yeah.
I mean, like at this point, I think I've proven myself enough that you should just be like, okay, yes, he's available. Great. Let's go.
Mm-hmm.
But this was a really large company and they didn't give a damn who or how much stuff was in the bookstore. They had a list of other potential applicants, other artists, and they were going to choose the best person, the unicorn that could do it all with the most vague of briefs. And I guess they found that person, and I desperately want to know who they are, and God bless them.
You're gonna
And
be like Googling when this thing comes out.
Yeah, right? Seriously.
yeah, and yeah, so I will totally keep it to myself, but I might just like vague book freak out on Facebook and be like, what? This is what they went with. No, I probably won't do that. That would be really unprofessional. But anyway, I'll say it to my wife. I'm like, do you believe this? Yeah. So, but yeah.
Yeah.
There's waves of it. It's like it's not just a student thing.
Yeah.
It happens in your actual career. So
If you're an artist and you think you can avoid getting feedback or giving feedback, you're
Think again.
yeah. Even if you work for yourself, it will happen. So you have to learn to do it.
And it has to happen because feedback is a way that we become better artists, and giving feedback, is also really important too. So understanding how to be on both sides of the fence or just one side of the fence and being more gracious to receive it, knowing when to receive it, knowing when to advocate for yourself or when to fight. It's all a part of learning and growing and a part of the journey of being an artist. This is natural. Sometimes it sucks real bad, and sometimes it helps. And you never know what you're going to get until you're going to get it. So I hope this episode helps you navigate that a little bit better in the future, and that you have a good takeaway from this. So anything else you want to send us off with before we go, Eric or Mia?
no. I was gonna say check the website of anybody that gives you feedback, and then just like decide accordingly. Just kind of
if it's
the purpose
unknown
of everything that we just said. So
well, all right, everybody. What about you, Mia? Anything?
I guess I'll try not to butcher this analogy, but when I think of like shooting baskets, you get really quick feedback, whether it's a good shot or not, because it either goes in or it doesn't. But with art, it's really hard because it's so subjective, right? And so I guess I see the more feedback you can get, it's like the closer you get to shooting baskets with your art, and I think that's when I became friends with it, with receiving it more, is looking at it that way. Instead of an attack on you or your voice, it's just more information so you can get better. But yeah.
100%. All right, everybody. I hope this episode was helpful to all of you and that you enjoyed it. But thank you so much for joining us. If you were in the live chat, I appreciate you engaging with us. And if you want to hear more from us, please follow our channel, subscribe. Yes, smash that like button, leave a comment. It helps with our engagement, and that we would love that so much. We also have a Facebook group called the Painted in Color Podcast Discussion Group. And, we have cool people there, and we talk about the topics that go into the episode. So if you want to join that and discuss, please feel free to do so. But anyway, thank you so much for your support, and we'll talk to you later. Bye, everybody.